Alright, welcome back. So today we're going to be reading a book by Patricia Polacco, and the book is called Thank You, Mr. Faulker. So what's going to happen is I'm going to read the book, and then after I'm done reading the book, we're going to answer some questions. So I want you to preview the questions first, so then you're thinking about them as we're reading the story. Alright, so our first question is events that happened in the story. So after we read the story, we're going to list all of the things that happened. What does the main character learn in the story? What was the main problem of the story and how was it solved? And why did the author write this story? Alright, so be thinking about those. Alright, and this will probably be a separate video. We'll see. Alright, so Thank You, Mr. Faulker by Patricia Polacco. Now, she writes a lot of books. Alright, I'm going to read it, and then I'll show you the pictures. The grandpa held a jar of honey so that all the family could see, then dipped a little ladle into it and drizzled the honey on the cover of a small book. The little girl had just turned 5. Stand up, little one, he cooed. I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you. Then he handed the book to her. Taste. She dipped her finger into the honey and put it into her mouth. What is the taste? The grandma asked. The little girl answered, sweet. Then all of the family said in a single voice, yes, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee that made that sweet honey. You have to chase it through the pages of a book. The little girl knew that the promise to read was at last hers. Soon she was going to learn to read. Here dipping the honey on the book. Trisha, the littlest girl in the family, grew up loving books. Her school teacher mother read to her every night. Her red-headed brother brought his books home from school and shared them, and whenever she visited the family farm, her grandfather or grandmother read to her by the stone fireplace. When she turned 5 and went to kindergarten, most of all, she hoped to read. Each day she saw the kids in the first grade across the hall reading, and before the year was over, some of the kids in her own class began reading. Not Trisha. Still, she loved being at school because she could draw. The other kids would crowd around her and watch her do magic with the crayons. In first grade, you'll learn to read, her brother said. In first grade, Trisha sat in a circle with the other kids. They were all holding Our Neighborhood, their first readers. Sounding out letters and words, they said, B, O, boy, and la, ook, look. The teacher smiled at them when they put all the sounds together and got a word right. But when Trisha looked at a page, all she saw were wiggling shapes. And when she tried to sound out words, the other kids laughed at her. Trisha, what are you looking at in that book? They'd say. I'm reading, she said back to them. But her teacher would move on to the next person. Always when it was her turn to read, her teacher had to help her with every single word. And while the other kids moved up into the second reader and the third reader, she stayed alone in Our Neighborhood. Trisha began to feel different. She began to feel dumb. She's trying so hard to learn how to read, isn't she? The harder words got for the little girl, the more and more time she spent drawing. How she loved to draw, or just sitting and dreaming, or what she could, going for walks with her grandmother. One summer day, she and her grandma were walking together in the small wood behind their farm. It was twilight. The air was sweet and warm. Fireflies were just coming up from the grasses. As they walked, Trisha said, Grandma, do you think I'm different? As they walked, of course, her grandma answered. To be different is the miracle of life. You see all those little fireflies? Everyone is different. Do you think I'm smart? Trisha didn't feel smart. Her grandmother hugged her. You are the smartest, quickest, dearest little thing ever. Right then, the little girl felt safe in her grandma's arms. Reading didn't matter so much. Just because you don't know how to read doesn't mean you aren't smart. People are smart in all kinds of different ways. Reading doesn't always, being a great reader doesn't always mean that you're smart. That's what makes you smart or not. Trisha's grandma used to say that the stars were holes in the sky. They were the light of heaven coming from the other side. And she used to say that someday she would be on the other side where the light comes from. One evening they lay on the grass together and counted the lights from heaven. You know, her grandma said, all of us will go there someday. Hang on to the grass or you'll lift right off the ground, and there you'll be. They laughed and both hung on to the grass, but it was not long after that night that her grandma must have let go of the grass because she went to where the lights were, on the other side, and not long after that, Trisha's grandpa let go of the grass too. School seemed harder and harder now. Reading was just plain torture. When Sue Ellen read her page, or Tommy, Bob read his page. They read so easily that Trisha would watch the top of their heads to see if something was happening to their heads that wasn't happening to hers. And numbers were the hardest thing of all to read. She never added anything right. Line up the numbers before you add them, the teacher would say, but when Trisha tried, the numbers looked like a stack of blocks, wobbly and ready to fall. She knew she was dumb. Then one day her mother announced that she had gotten a teaching job in California, a long way from the family farm in Michigan. So what do you think is going to happen? Her mom got a job in Michigan. What might happen? Take a second to think about it. Even though her grandma and grandpa were gone, the little girl didn't want to move. Maybe, though, the teachers and kids in her new school wouldn't know how dumb she was. She and her mother and brother moved across the country in a two-toned 1949 Plymouth. It took 5 days. But at the new school, it was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over the words. The cat ran. She was reading like a baby in 3rd grade. And when her teacher read along with them and called on Trisha for an answer, she gave the wrong answer every time. Hey, dummy, a boy called out to her on the playground. How come you're so dumb? Other kids stood near him and they laughed. Trisha could feel the tears burning in her eyes. How she longed to go back to her grandparents' farm in Michigan. How do you think Trisha is feeling right now? Probably a little sad, right? Sad, alone, hurt, because of the mean words people are saying to her. Now Trisha wanted to go to school less and less. I have a sore throat, she'd say to her mother, or I have a stomach ache. She dreamed more and more and drew more and more, and she hated school. Then when Trisha started 5th grade, the school was all a buzz. There was a new teacher. He was tall and elegant. Everybody loved his striped coat and slick gray pants. He wore the neatest clothes. All the usual teachers' pets gathered around them. Stevie Joe, Alice Marie, Davy, and Michael Lee. But right from the start, it didn't seem to matter to Mr. Faulker which kids were the cutest or the smartest or the best at anything. Mr. Faulker would stand behind Trisha whenever she was drawing and whisper, "This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Do you know how talented you are?" When he said this, even the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at her drawings, but they still laughed whenever she gave a wrong answer. Then one day she had to stand up and read, which she hated. She was stumbling through a page in Charlotte's Web, and the page was going all fuzzy when the kids began to laugh out loud. Mr. Faulker in his plaid jacket and his butterfly tie said, "Stop! Are all of you perfect that you could look at another person and find fault with her?" So what is he saying there? He's asking them, don't you make mistakes? So if you're going to find fault with her, right, then you should all be perfect. And are they all perfect? No, absolutely not. No one's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes, no matter who you are, right? Everyone makes mistakes, and that's okay. That's part of being human. That was the last day anyone laughed out loud or made fun of her, all except Eric. He had sat behind Trisha for 2 whole years, but he seemed almost to hate her. Trisha didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her and pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned in her face, and called, "Toad." Trisha was afraid to turn any corner for fear Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The only time she was really happy when she was around Mr. Faulker. He let her erase the blackboards. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right, and he looked hard and mean at any kid who teased her. But the nicer Mr. Faulker was to Trisha, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait for her on the playground or in the cafeteria or even in the bathroom, and to jump out at her, call her stupid or ugly. Those are very hurtful words, right? How would that make you feel if you heard someone call that? I know I would feel sad, I would feel afraid, I would feel lonely, I would feel left out. And Trisha began to believe them. She discovered that if she asked to go to the bathroom just before recess, she could hide under the inside stairwell during the free time and not have to go outside at all. In the dark place, she felt completely safe. But one day at recess, Eric followed her to her secret hiding place. "Have you become a mole?" he laughed, and he pulled her out into the hall and danced around her. "Dumbbell, dumbbell, maggoty old dumbbell." Trisha buried her head in her arms and curled up into a ball. Suddenly she heard footsteps. It was Mr. Faulker. He marched Eric down to the office. When he came back, he found Trisha. "I don't think you'll have to worry about that boy again," he said softly. "What was he teasing you about, little one?" "I don't know," Trisha shrugged. Eric was not being nice. Trisha was sure Mr. Faulker believed that she could read. She had learned to memorize what the kid next to her was reading, or she would wait for Mr. Faulker to help her with a sentence. Then she'd say the same thing he did. "Good," he would say. Then one day, Mr. Faulker asked her to stay after school and help her wash the blackboards. He put on music and brought out little sandwiches as they worked and talked. All at once, he said, "Let's play a game. I'll shout out letters, you write them on the board with the wet sponge as quickly as you can." "A," he shouted. She wiped a watery A. "8," he shouted. She made a watery 8. 14, 3, D, M, Q, he shouted out. He shouted out many letters and numbers. Then he walked up behind her, and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Trisha knew that none of the letters or numbers looked like they should. She threw the sponge down and tried to run. But Mr. Faulker caught her arm and sank to his knees in front of her. "You poor baby," he said. "You think you're dumb, don't you?" "How awful for you to be so lonely and afraid," she sobbed. "But little one, you don't understand. You don't see letters or numbers the way other people do. And you've gotten through school all this time and fooled many good teachers." He smiled at her. "That cunning and smartness and such bravery." Then he stood up and finished. "We're going to change all that, girl. You're going to read. I promise you that." So Mr. Faulker's going to try to help her. Now, almost every day after school, she met with Mr. Faulker and Miss Plessy and a reading teacher. They did a lot of things she didn't even understand. At first, she made circles in the sand and then a big sponge with circles on the blackboard going from left to right. Another day, they flicked letters on a screen and Trisha shouted them out loud. Still other days, she worked with wooden blocks and built letters, words, always sounding them out. And that felt good. But though she read words, she hadn't read a whole sentence, and deep down, she still felt dumb. And then one spring day, had it been 3 or 4 months since they had started, Mr. Faulker put a book in front of her. She'd never seen it before. He picked up a paragraph in the middle of the page and pointed at it. Almost as if it were magic or if light had poured into her brain, the words and sentences started to take shape on the page, as they never had before. She marched them off, too. Slowly she read the sentence, then another, and another, and finally she read a paragraph, and she understood the whole thing. She didn't notice that Mr. Faulker and Mrs. Plessy had tears in their eyes. That's right. Tricia ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounded up the front steps, threw open her front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went into the living room and found the book on a shelf, the very book that her grandpa had shown her so many years ago. She spooned honey on the cover and tasted the sweetness and said to herself, "The honey is sweet and so is knowledge, but knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of a book." Then she held the book, honey and all, close to her chest. She could feel the tears roll down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. She was happy. So very happy. The rest of the year became an odyssey of discovery and adventure for the little girl. She learned to love school. I know, because that little girl was me, Patricia Polacco. I saw Mr. Faulker again some 30 years later at a wedding. I walked up to him and introduced myself. At first, he had difficulty placing me. Then I told him who I was and how he changed my life so many years ago. He hugged me and asked me what I did for a living. "Why, Mr. Faulker," I answered, "I make books for children." "Thank you, Mr. Faulker." Thank you. Okay. So, I want you to pause the video if you want to, and I want you to answer some of these questions. What does the main character learn in this story? What was the main problem and how was it solved? And why did the author write this story? We just found out about that. And then events that happened in the story. All right, so pause for a second. All right, I think you might be all done. And so we are going to write down some things that happened. So what was the first thing that happened in the story? Remember she was talking with her grandfather and the honey. So we're going to write grandfather puts honey on a book. Then what happens? Yeah, she goes to school. So she goes to school. Now, does school go really well for her, or does school not go so well for her? It doesn't really go well for her, right? So she struggles. Then what happens with her mom? Yeah, they get a new job, right? So they get a new job. The mom gets a new job and they move. Where do they move to? Do you remember? Yeah, they moved to California. CA, that's abbreviation for California. Okay, so they moved to California and then she's in a new school and she's hoping for kind of a new start, right? She's hoping for a new start, but she doesn't get the new start she's looking for. Instead, when she goes to school, people bully her, make fun of her. And then she's still struggling, and she's still struggling. But what does she find that she's really good at? Drawing. She starts drawing. Okay, and then she makes it to 5th grade, right? And there's a new teacher, and she meets Mr. Faulker. meets Mr. Faulker. Let's try to find when that happens. She meets Mr. Faulker, and Mr. Faulker was really, really nice, right? He was super nice. But Eric was really mean. And Eric was still mean to her, even the nicer Mr. Faulker was to her. It seemed like the meaner Eric was. So then Eric was mean. And what did Trisha used to do at recess? Where did she used to hide? Where did she used to hide? Used to hide in the stairwell at recess, right? Okay, so then what happens? Mr. Faulker finds her, right? And he talks with her after school. So I'm going to say Mr. F, so I don't have to write all this out. So Mr. F talks and what did she start getting? She starts getting help with reading, right? And at the end, what did she think of reading? Does she like it or does she not like it? She likes it. Get the book. She likes reading. Okay. So, let's use this information here to answer some questions. So, what are some things that the main character learns in this story? I'm getting out my thing. What are some things the main character learns? Maybe she learns to not give up. Maybe she learns to keep trying. No one is perfect. And there could be lots of other things on here too. What was the main problem of the story? How was it solved? I see two main problems in the story. What was one main problem of the story? Yeah. Trisha was struggling in school, right? What was the second main problem of the story? Yeah, kids weren't being very nice to her, right? And then okay. And then how was it solved? Who helped her? Yeah, Mr. Faulker helped. Okay. So why did the author write this story? And we found out this at the end. What happened? Yeah, this story was based on her, right? Based on her experience. And then, what else? Why might she write this story? Yeah, maybe to help other people, right? maybe to help motivate someone who's struggling. All right. So thank you for reading with me. I know this was kind of a longer video, but I hope this is a good reading activity to help you keep up with your reading comprehension. And I think this is a really motivating story because I think a lot of us might struggle with something. And it's important to know that we aren't perfect and it's okay to struggle. That makes us human. And there's always someone out there to help. Okay? So keep trying. Don't give up, right? All right. Until next time. Bye.